I don't usually start off my videos with content warnings, but this one might need it, so here goes. This video is about the end of the world, how we almost destroyed it in 1971, and how recent events are accelerating a catastrophic system that can only end in one way. And to tell it, I have to start in the Oval Office.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
You probably saw something about this exchange between Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, Trump, and J.D. Vance. Zelensky was in Washington, D.C., hoping to land a security deal that would let him continue fighting off Russia's invasion of his country.
This is going to be great television.
But to anyone who's been watching the news over the last few years, it was no surprise that things went quickly sideways.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers.
It was an ambush. Or to put it in terms that the younger generations might appreciate,
it's a trap!
Instead of continuing American foreign policy and supporting a country that was unjustly invaded, Trump browbeat the Ukrainian president and tried to get him to accept concessions of mineral rights without any security guarantees. The meeting ended with Trump kicking Zelensky out of the Oval Office and then canceling all arms shipments and aid to the Ukrainian front lines. Shortly afterwards, Elon Musk tweeted that he supported the United States leaving NATO. And I don't know what's more terrifying, that Trump is echoing Putin's talking points, or that the United States might soon turn against the most successful international alliance in history. We might soon be in a world where it's the United States and Russia against the Western world. But that's not exactly what I'm here to talk about. Instead, I want to look at a much greater looming threat than what happens when you shuffle up the pieces on this great international military chessboard. I want to talk about why the United States is defending Ukraine in the first place. And to do that, we're going to go back to 2014, when then Senator and current Secretary of State under Trump, Marco Rubio, spoke about Russia's initial invasion of the Crimean Peninsula.
I wanted to speak about the issue of Ukraine. When the Soviet Union fell in the early 1990s, Ukraine was left with the world's third largest stockpile of tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons on the planet. But they signed this agreement with the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia that basically said, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we, these three countries that signed to this, will provide for your defense and assure you of your defense. And so Ukraine did that. They gave up these weapons. Well, now, this was signed in 1994, 20 years later, one of the three countries that signed that agreement hasn't just not provided for their defense, they actually invaded them.
So for a quick recap of the history of the nuclear age, after America dropped nuclear weapons on Japan to end World War II, it was clear that for the first time in history, one nation with nuclear weapons could single-handedly destroy all life on the planet. Since any attack on a nuclear-armed nation would mean total destruction, countries with nukes felt safer than those without them. Within a few decades, 10 countries had their own arsenals, which led to the problem that if every nation has the ability to destroy the planet, then there are that many more chances for a small and regional conflict to escalate out of control. So, as Rubio noted in 2014,
think about if you're one of these other countries around the world right now that feels threatened by your neighbors, and the United States and the rest of the world are going to you and saying, listen, don't develop nuclear weapons. Don't develop nuclear weapons, South Korea. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Japan. Don't develop nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia. We will protect you. We will watch out for you. What kind of lesson do you think this instance sends to them? I think the message this is sending to many nations around the world is perhaps we can no longer count on the security promises made by the free world. Perhaps we need to start looking out for ourselves.
And this is the actual issue that everyone in the world needs to consider when Trump told Zelensky,
"You're gambling with World War III."
Because it's not Zelensky spinning that roulette wheel. It's Trump. Because the bigger issue isn't Ukraine, it's the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the destructive potential that even a small and regional conflict would wreak across the globe. Wait, I've been demonetized? This is crazy. Okay, this video, which I spent probably 2 days on, has been demonetized by YouTube because it deals with sensitive events like war and genocide and things that we are actually living through. And YouTube doesn't like that. They don't think that advertisers want to know the reality about the world, which is really disheartening for me because since that's the main way I support this channel. So I'm breaking in to this video to say, please like and subscribe and share and all that stuff. And if you would please consider keeping me alive as a journalist and supporting my channel on Substack, it means the world to me. And otherwise, this stuff doesn't get made. It's already hard enough with all of the other challenges I have to not literally be able to make money on this channel. So I know that. So if you would, go to Substack and consider supporting the channel. And with that out of the way, this is the video I worked on for the last couple days. According to a research paper from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, even a contained nuclear exchange between minor powers could still end life on the planet. In 2019, the AAAS modeled a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, where the two nuclear-armed powers deployed only a fraction of their weapons against one another. And here's what they found. If India uses 100 strategic weapons to attack urban centers in Pakistan, and Pakistan uses 150, fatalities could reach 50 to 125 million people, and nuclear-ignited fires could release 16 to 36 TG of black carbon in smoke, depending on the yield. Now, TG, I don't know what that stands for, but it just means a lot. The smoke will rise into the upper troposphere, be self-lofted into the stratosphere, and spread globally within weeks. Surface sunlight will decline by 20 to 35%, cooling the global surface by 2 to 5 degrees Celsius, and reducing precipitation by 15 to 30%, with larger regional impacts. Recovery takes more than 10 years. Net primary productivity declines 15 to 30% on land and 5 to 15% in oceans, threatening mass starvation and additional worldwide collateral fatalities. Do you remember the time a few years ago when a boat went sideways in the Suez Canal and it effectively shut down the global economy? Fuel prices spiked, there were food shortages everywhere, and inflation went out of control. Now imagine what happens when global productivity declines by 15 to 30% because not enough sunlight reaches the ground. 10 years of nuclear winter would all but destroy the delicate balance of international trade that literally keeps you alive. Just remember the peak oil theory, where we were running out of enough oil production and just even a small little decline in that would have catastrophic cascading consequences everywhere. Well, taking out like a third of the planet would be so much worse. But wait, there's more. That study examined primarily what happened on land after a nuclear war, but if you notice our globe, the planet is mostly water. So in 2022, a team at the Scientific Consortium, AGU, looked at what would happen to our oceans in detail. And here's their abstract. We simulated a US-Russia war and several India-Pakistan wars. In all scenarios, firestorms from nuclear war would deliver soot to the upper atmosphere, blocking out the sun and causing global cooling. Impacts of the nuclear cooling event include expansion of sea ice into populated coastal areas and the decimation of ocean marine life. In all scenarios, the oceans cool rapidly, but does not return to the pre-war state when the smoke clears. And, maybe you were thinking that this was Trump's plan all along to fix climate change. After all, nuclear winter with a steep decline in oceanic temperatures would effectively reverse one aspect of the damage that we have done to the planet with carbon emissions. But I don't think that is an experiment that any of us really wants to run. And so, to recap, we've gone over how it's really bad to undermine security guarantees that were given to end nuclear proliferation because it means a world where every country needs nukes to defend their own borders. And we've talked about how even a small nuclear war is going to be very, very bad for everyone else on the planet. Now I want to dig into one historical precedent that I hope shows you exactly how easy it is to set off a nuclear war in the first place. You might recognize this story because it's the topic of the 2022 book I wrote with my friend Jason Michelin called The Vortex, a true story of history's deadliest storm, an unspeakable war and liberation. This is the speedrun version of that plot. On November 11th, 1970, a Category 4 cyclone slammed into the coast of East Pakistan, a territory that you know now as the country of Bangladesh, and it killed 500,000 people in the course of a few hours. It was the deadliest storm in history. And for reasons that I'm not going to go into now, Pakistan had two wings, east and west, with its mortal enemy of India sitting in between. It was a bad situation, and West Pakistan had all of the power, and it treated the eastern wing like a colonial fiefdom. The storm happened to hit just before a national election, and the leader of Pakistan, a genocidal general by the name of Yahya Khan, happened to be on excellent terms with Richard Nixon. Yahya Khan figured that he could win the election easily if the eastern wing of his country stayed in disarray. So he denied aid to the region, fomented a cholera outbreak, as well as mass starvation, using the disaster for his political advantage. But like many a dictator before him, it turned out that his plan was idiotic. When the election finally happened, all of the divided Eastern Pakistan parties united and won enough votes not only to install their own president, prime minister, but to take over the entire legislature as well. For an allegory, think of it this way. It would be like in the next election, the Democrats got 80% of the popular vote and completely ousted the Republicans from power entirely. Yahya Khan didn't like that result, of course, and he called the election illegitimate. He said that the fake news media was lying about everything, and then he made a deal with Nixon to get a huge arms shipment delivered to his country. During the few months of the interregnum, he funneled troops and American weapons into the eastern wing of Pakistan. And then, just before the new leader was set to take power, Yahya Khan began a genocide against his own people. He kicked off what is known as Operation Searchlight, which liquidated students and professors and political dissidents. There was a systematized rape campaign. He was quoted at the time as saying that if I just kill 3 million of them, the rest will eat out of our hand. And that is exactly what he did. The Bengali genocide had 3 million fatalities associated with it. And here is where things get really, really tense and interesting. It turned out that the people of East Pakistan didn't appreciate the systematic pogrom of rape and murder across their country, and they formed a resistance movement and sought allies. As millions of East Pakistanis flooded over the Indian border, India prepared a counteroffensive. Now, I'm going to skip over an insane amount of history here, but soon there were new battle lines. And at the time, India was a Soviet ally and armed with Soviet military aircraft and had what you would call a tentative mutual security assistance pact. Meanwhile, the United States was allied closely with Pakistan, and the genocide was happening with American bullets, American tanks, American planes, and I kid you not, with American flamethrowers. All that came to a head in January 1972, when the Indian and rebel forces were closing in on the capital city of Dhaka, and Yahya Khan convinced the United States to intercede directly. Nixon sent the Enterprise. No, not that one. The nuclear-armed aircraft carrier, the pride of the American fleet, into the Bay of Bengal, with orders to destroy the Indian Air Force and deploy its nuclear arsenal if necessary. Secretary of War at the time, Henry Kissinger, called this our Waterloo and pressed for the use of nukes. Meanwhile, and unbeknownst to the crew on the Enterprise, the Soviet Union had sent a submarine and a missile cruiser fleet into the Bay of Bengal with similar orders. If the Enterprise crossed an arbitrary line in the sea, they were required to destroy the American boats and thus initiate a nuclear exchange between superpowers. And then two things happened. First, Rear Admiral Kruglyakov, the commander of the Soviet fleet, disobeyed orders from the Kremlin and effectively informed the Enterprise of its peril when he ordered 3 of his submarines to surface along the Red Line within visual sight of the aircraft carrier. The two fleets were facing off with the globe at stake. They stayed there motionless as Kissinger begged Nixon to give the order to fire. The logic at the time was that a nuclear strike in the water would be a more measured response than an all-out nuclear exchange, but we all know how this would end. We were minutes away from total global annihilation when the other shoe dropped. The Indian Army and the rebel forces took Dhaka. The city fell, and the Pakistani army capitulated. East Pakistan was liberated and became the country you know today as Bangladesh. And that, in short, is the reason why you're alive today. You owe your life to these scrappy forces of rebels and Indian fighters. So why am I telling you this story? Well, it's because it has everything to do what is happening right now in Ukraine, as well as nuclear proliferation and how climate change, like a single storm, can set off a series of events that leads to total global destruction. Because big things have very, very small beginnings. After Pakistan's loss to India, they set about creating their own nuclear arsenal because they realized that it was the only way to project power over their neighbor. In response, India developed their own nukes as well, and now there are between 340 and 500 nuclear weapons on the Indian subcontinent, ready to deploy on a moment's notice. And now for a little bit more modern context. During his first term, Trump pulled out of the American deal with Iran to stop its nuclear program. And it's likely that they could have full nuclear capabilities within a few months if they wanted to. All they have to do is restart their refining capabilities. And of course, North Korea, an ally of Russia, has nukes. And the security guarantees that we gave to South Korea, our ally, are already looking less secure when we break the deal with Ukraine. Indeed, the message that the United States is sending to the world when Trump kicked Zelensky out of the White House is absolutely clear. Every country needs nuclear weapons if it wants to defend itself. You can't depend on Big Brother to come in with their nukes to defend you because those nukes may not be there when you need them. And so I have to ask you, what will happen the next time two small regional nuclear-armed powers decide that they have no option but to go all in? Again, if you want to know the whole story of how a storm kicked off a series of events that not only reformed Asia, but almost destroyed the world itself, go check out my book, The Vortex. It was even a finalist for some pretty big awards, and so that's pretty cool. It reads like a novel, not like a sort of a dry historical text. There's really cool battle scenes, and you'll enjoy it, and you'll think about what revolution actually looks like, what it actually takes on the ground to kick a dictator out of office and win. And the heroes in this, the heroes are just ordinary people, which is a message that I think needs to spread in the current world we live in. And finally, if you're looking for another video about the absolute horror show of what is going on in the government right now, you might want to look at my video, The Great American Pyramid Scheme, where I look at lawsuits between some minor characters who are close to Donald Trump and how that provides an anatomical sketch of our current president's plan to personally profit off of his office.
The Fox News decision desk can now officially project that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
Inflation has always been very good for real estate. But unfortunately, at the end, the whole thing pops. Okay, that's the bad part.
That piece took me like a month of research and writing, and at the moment only has about 20,000 views. And I don't know why. Do I need a different thumbnail, or maybe there's a different title? Give it a watch and tell me what you think. Thanks again so much for being here from PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado. This was Scott Carney Investigates. Thank you so much to all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. If you want early access and to get your name on the honor roll, please check out those links down below. And, it just means the world to me that you're here. From PokeyBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.